Imagine texting 911 to your husband because you're having a stroke. You see the read receipt, 8:47 p.m. Read, you think help is coming, you trust him. But instead of calling an ambulance, he does something so evil, so calculated, that it will make your blood run cold. What would you do if the person who promised to love you forever chose to watch you die? What if that red receipt, that tiny notification we all check obsessively, became proof of attempted murder? Charlotte Hayes was 7 months pregnant when she realized the man sleeping beside her every night had been planning her death for months. The nursery she painted alone, the doctor appointments he convinced her to skip, the life insurance policies she never signed. It was all part of his plan. And here's what terrifies me most. This wasn't his first time. Before we dive into Charlotte's nightmare, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button because this story gets darker than you can imagine, and you'll want to hear how a single read receipt brought down a serial killer. And if this story makes you think twice about who you trust, share it, because somewhere another Charlotte might need to hear this before it's too late. Now let me tell you about the night everything changed. Charlotte survived because she was stubborn, because she documented everything, because she trusted herself when no one else did. Her story saved 14 other women from the same fate. If this story changed how you see relationships, hit like. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share it now. And subscribe because I have more stories about women who refuse to be victims. Stories that could save a life. Maybe even yours. Drop a comment telling me, what would you do if you saw that red receipt and no help came? I read every single one. See you in the next story. Charlotte Hayes was 7 months pregnant when she realized her husband was going to let her die. It started with a text message. 911 stroke, can't talk, help. Sent at 8:47 on a Tuesday night. Brett read it immediately. The read receipt proved it. 8:47 p.m. Read. But instead of calling for help, Brett Hayes did something unthinkable. He looked at his phone. He saw his pregnant wife was having a stroke, and he walked away. Where did he go? To his mistress's birthday party. The Instagram post showed him laughing, arm around another woman, champagne glass raised. 8:55 p.m., 8 minutes after reading that text. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how Charlotte ended up on that nursery floor, alone, dying, trusting a read receipt that meant nothing. Charlotte Hayes was 32 years old, a successful architect with her own firm in Connecticut. She designed beautiful homes for wealthy clients, homes with perfect nurseries and safe spaces for families to grow. She never imagined she'd almost die in one of those nurseries. Brett Hayes was 38, CEO of Hayes Tech Solutions, worth $50 million on paper. He was charming, ambitious, and very good at making people believe whatever he wanted them to believe. They'd been married 5 years. Charlotte thought they were happy. She painted the nursery herself in soft yellow because Brett said he was too busy with work. She folded tiny clothes alone because Brett had late meetings. She went to doctor's appointments by herself because Brett couldn't get away from the office. Looking back, Charlotte could see the pattern. But when you're living it, when you love someone, you make excuses. You tell yourself he's just stressed, just busy, just building a future for your family. The cracks started showing 6 months before that terrible Tuesday night. Charlotte had her first emergency room visit for a severe headache and blurred vision. The ER doctor wanted to run tests, concerned about stroke risk in pregnancy. Then Brett called. "Baby, you're fine," he said. "It's just pregnancy hormones. These doctors want to run expensive tests for everything. Come home. We'll make you comfortable." Charlotte hesitated. "The doctor said we should do a CT scan," she told him. "You don't need that," Brett said. His voice was so calm, so reasonable. "You're just stressed. You need rest, not radiation. Think about the baby." Charlotte signed the against medical advice form and left. She trusted her husband. Why wouldn't she? It happened again 2 months later. Dizziness and numbness in her right hand. Same scenario. ER doctor recommended immediate testing. Brett called, same soothing voice, same logical arguments. Charlotte left before the tests were complete. Third time was 4 months into the pregnancy. Severe headache, facial tingling. The ER doctor was more insistent this time. "Mrs. Hayes, these are stroke warning signs. You need a full neurological workup." But Brett arrived in person that time. He spoke privately with Charlotte in the hallway, his hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle. Baby, you're making yourself sick with worry. These doctors see problems where there aren't any. They want to cover themselves legally. You don't need invasive tests. You need to relax. Charlotte wanted to believe him, wanted to think she was just anxious, just overreacting. Brett seemed so certain, so confident, and she was tired of feeling scared all the time. She left again, signed in the AMA form again, went home again. What Charlotte didn't know was that Brett was systematically preventing her from getting the medical care that could have prevented her stroke. What she didn't know was that he'd increased her life insurance to $3.5 million 3 months earlier. What she didn't know was that he'd been planning this for a very long time. Here's something important for anyone listening. If you text 911 to someone and they read it but don't respond within 60 seconds, don't wait. Don't trust that they're calling for help. Call 911 yourself. Don't trust anyone with your life, not even the person who promised to love you forever. Because that Tuesday night, Charlotte trusted the read receipt. She saw that Brett had read her message at 8:47. She thought help was coming. She thought her husband would save her. She was wrong. But I'm still getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about that Tuesday, about the yellow onesies with ducks on them, about the moment Charlotte's right hand went numb, about the longest 11 hours of her life. Tuesday started normally. Brett left for work at 7 a.m. with a quick kiss on Charlotte's forehead. Working late tonight, he said. Big client meeting. Don't wait up. Charlotte spent the day working from home, designing a renovation for a client in Greenwich. She took breaks to walk around the house, one hand on her belly, talking to the baby. Just 2 more months, sweetie, then we get to meet you. At 6 p.m., Charlotte made herself dinner, grilled chicken and salad. She ate alone at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone. Brett hadn't texted all day. She thought about calling him, but he'd told her to stop checking in so much, said it made him feel suffocated. After dinner, Charlotte went upstairs to the nursery. The room was almost ready. Crib assembled, changing table stocked, clothes washed and folded. She'd done it all herself. Brett was too busy. At 8:40 p.m., Charlotte was folding tiny onesies when her right hand went numb. The numbness started in Charlotte's fingertips and spread up her arm. She dropped the onesie she was holding, a white one with yellow ducks. Watched it fall to the floor. Charlotte flexed her fingers. They moved, but it felt wrong. Disconnected. Like watching someone else's hand through foggy glass. She walked to the bathroom, turned on the light, stared at herself in the mirror, tried to smile. The left side of her mouth curved up normally. The right side didn't move. That's when the fear hit. Real cold fear that made her heart pound. Charlotte tried to say her own name out loud. Charlotte. It came out wrong, slurred. Charlot. She stumbled back to the nursery, grabbed her phone with her left hand. Her right hand hung useless at her side. She tried to unlock her phone. It took 3 attempts. Call Brett. She tapped his name. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, voicemail. Charlotte tried to speak. Brett, something wrong, can't talk right. Help. The words were garbled, thick. Would he even understand? She hung up, tried to think through the panic. What were the signs of stroke? Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. She had all 3. She needed to text. Her left thumb was clumsy, but it worked. 911 stroke, can't talk, help. She sent it to Brett first. He was her husband. He would see it. He would help. Then she tried to open the emergency services text line. Her fingers fumbled. The screen was too bright. Her vision was getting blurry around the edges. She managed to type the same message. 911 stroke, can't talk, help, sent. She tried to add her address, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. The phone slipped from her left hand, clattered on the hardwood floor. Charlotte lowered herself carefully to the floor, grabbed the edge of the changing table for support. The baby kicked hard, more forceful than usual. It's okay, baby, Charlotte whispered. Help is coming. Daddy will see the message. Help is coming. Her phone was just out of reach. She could see the screen. 8:49 p.m., no messages yet. But Brett had read her text. She could see the little notification. Read at 8:47 p.m., he saw it. Relief flooded through her. He knew. Help was coming. Charlotte lay down on the nursery rug, the yellow and white chevron pattern soft under her cheek. She closed her eyes. Just for a minute, just until the paramedics arrived. Brett would have called them by now, would have given them the address. The baby kicked again. Charlotte put her left hand on her belly. "Daddy's coming," she whispered. Her words barely sounded like words anymore. She drifted. The world went soft and gray. Somewhere in that gray space, Charlotte heard things. Her phone buzzing. Once. Twice. Multiple times. She tried to reach for it, couldn't move, couldn't open her eyes properly. The sound of a door opening downstairs, the garage door. That's Brett. He's home. He's here to help. Charlotte tried to call out. Nothing came but a weak sound. Footsteps downstairs, then silence. Then footsteps upstairs, coming down the hall, getting closer. The footsteps stopped just outside the nursery door. Charlotte tried to speak again. "Brett," she tried to say. "Help." Silence. Just breathing. Someone standing right outside the door. Then a voice, Brett's voice. Quiet, like he was talking to himself. Oh, shit. More silence. Charlotte waited for him to come in, to help her, to call 911. The footsteps walked away, back down the hall, down the stairs, fast, like he was running. The garage door opened again. A car started. Brett's Mercedes, she recognized the sound. He was leaving. He was actually leaving. Charlotte tried to make sense of it, tried to think, but the gray was taking over. Maybe she was confused. Maybe the stroke was making her hear things wrong. He wouldn't leave. He wouldn't. Help was coming. It had to be coming. Charlotte let the gray take her under. Brightness woke her. Painful, sharp sunlight streaming through the nursery window. The blinds were still open from last night. Last night, how long had she been lying here? Charlotte tried to move. Her entire right side was numb, completely numb. She couldn't feel her right arm or right leg, couldn't move them at all. Panic tried to rise, but she pushed it down. She needed her phone, needed to see if Brett had called for help, needed to know why no one had come. Her phone was 3 feet away. She used her left arm to drag herself toward it, pulled herself across the rug using her left leg. Her pregnant belly made it awkward, difficult. The baby wasn't kicking anymore. The baby. Oh God, the baby. Charlotte reached her phone. The screen was black. Dead battery. She grabbed the charging cord with her left hand, plugged the phone in with shaking fingers. The screen lit up. 6% battery. Charging. The time said 7:23 in the morning. She'd been lying on the floor for almost 11 hours. 11 hours! Why didn't anyone come? Charlotte opened her messages with her left thumb. Her text thread with Brett was at the top. Her message from last night was there. 911, stroke can't talk help. Sent at 8:47 p.m. Below it said read, 8:47 p.m. He'd read it immediately. But below that red receipt was nothing, no response. No, I'm calling 911. No, I'm coming home. No, are you okay? Just his text from this morning. Sent at 6:45 a.m. Stayed at Marcus's after drinks. Heading to office. Charlotte stared at the screen. He read her message that she was having a stroke. Rated at 8:47. And he sent nothing back until morning. And when he did, it was casual. Like nothing had happened. She scrolled to her sent messages. 3 texts sent last night. The one to Brett, the one to emergency services, and one to Jessica. The emergency services text had a response. Address confirmation needed. She hadn't been able to type the address. Her fingers had stopped working. But Brett knew their address. Brett could have called, could have told them. Brett read her message. The red receipt proved it. Charlotte checked her phone location history. Last night at 8:47, she'd been home. Obviously, she'd been dying on the nursery floor. Where had Brett been? She couldn't access his location. He'd turned off sharing months ago. Said it drained his battery. Said she was checking on him too much. Said she needed to trust him. Charlotte's left hand was shaking. She needed to call someone, needed help now. The baby hadn't moved in hours. She tried to call Jessica, her best friend. Pediatric nurse. Would know what to do. Her mouth wouldn't work right to talk. She managed to text instead. Left-handed typing was slow. Help me. The letters were wrong, but close enough. She hit send. Then Charlotte laid back on the nursery floor and counted her breaths. In, out. Waiting. The baby had to be okay. The baby had to move. Just one kick. Just one sign. Nothing. Charlotte closed her eyes and started counting ceiling tiles instead. If she could count to 100, the baby would move. If she could count to 100, help would come. If she could count to 100, this wouldn't be real. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Her phone rang. Jessica. Jessica Palmer had a spare key to Charlotte's house. She'd insisted on it 6 months ago when Brett started traveling more for work. Just in case, Jessica had said. Pregnant women need backup. Charlotte heard the front door open, heard Jessica calling her name. Charlotte, Charlie, where are you? Charlotte tried to answer. The sound that came out wasn't words. Footsteps pounding up the stairs, running. Then Jessica was in the doorway of the nursery. Her face went white. Oh my God, Charlie. Jessica dropped to her knees beside Charlotte. Her nurse training kicked in immediately. Checked pulse, checked pupil response. Saw the facial drooping, saw the useless right side. How long have you been like this? Charlotte tried to answer. Long time. All night. All night? You've been on the floor all night? Charlotte tried to nod. The movement was small. Jessica grabbed her phone, called 911. Her voice was calm but urgent. I need an ambulance. My friend is 32 years old, 7 months pregnant. She's had a stroke, facial drooping, right side paralysis, speech impairment. She's been down for approximately 11 hours. The dispatcher asked questions. Jessica answered, gave the address, gave Charlotte's information. Yes, she was breathing. Yes, she was conscious. No, there was no one else there. Where's Brett? Jessica asked Charlotte while waiting for the ambulance. Charlotte tried to point to her phone. Jessica picked it up, looked at the screen. The text thread with Brett was still open. Jessica's face changed, from concern to confusion to something cold and hard. He read this. Last night at 8:47, you texted him you were having a stroke and he read it. Charlotte tried to say yes. It came out as a weak sound, and he didn't respond. He didn't call 911. He didn't come home. Jessica scrolled through the messages, saw Brett's casual text from this morning. Stayed at Marcus's after drinks. That son of a bitch. Charlotte had never heard Jessica curse like that. Jessica was religious, went to church every Sunday, didn't swear. The ambulance wailed outside. Jessica ran downstairs to let them in. 2 paramedics rushed into the nursery with equipment and a gurney. They worked fast, asked Charlotte questions she couldn't answer properly. Asked Jessica questions instead. When did the stroke start? How long ago? Any other symptoms? They checked the baby's heartbeat with a handheld monitor. The sound filled the nursery. Fast, fluttering, irregular. One paramedic looked at the other. We need to move now. Baby's in distress. They loaded Charlotte onto the gurney, strapped her in, started an IV in her left arm. The right arm was too weak. Jessica followed them down the stairs and into the ambulance, climbed in beside Charlotte and held her left hand. I've got you, Charlie. You're going to be okay. The baby's going to be okay. Charlotte wanted to believe her. The ambulance pulled away from the house, siren screaming. Charlotte looked out the back window at her home. The house Brett said would be perfect for raising a family. The house with the nursery she'd painted herself. The house where she'd almost died alone. At the hospital, everything happened fast. They rushed Charlotte into the emergency room. A team of doctors and nurses surrounded her. Someone called for a neurologist. Someone else called for an OB/GYN. Charlotte lay on the hospital bed while people poked and prodded her, shined lights in her eyes, tested her reflexes, asked her to squeeze hands. She could only squeeze with her left hand. The right hand lay useless on the bed. A doctor with kind eyes and gray hair introduced herself. Charlotte, I'm Dr. Helen Greenberg. I'm a neurologist. We're going to do a CT scan and an MRI to see what's happening in your brain. Can you tell me when the symptoms started? Charlotte tried. Last night. 8. Folding laundry. Around 8 last night? Charlotte nodded. And you didn't come to the hospital until now? That was almost 12 hours ago, Charlotte tried to explain. Tried to tell her about the text, about Brett reading it and not responding. The words came out garbled. Jessica stepped in. She texted her husband for help. He read the message and didn't respond. I have proof on her phone. Dr. Greenberg's expression shifted. May I see that? Jessica handed over Charlotte's phone, showed her the text thread, showed her the timestamp, showed her the read receipt. Dr. Greenberg's jaw tightened. She looked at Charlotte. Charlotte, did your husband see this message? Charlotte nodded. And he didn't call for help? Charlotte shook her head. Dr. Greenberg looked at Jessica. We need to report this. This is a delayed emergency response. There are protocols. She turned to a nurse. Page social services and call hospital security. We may need to involve police. Charlotte's vision blurred with tears. She wasn't crying about Brett. She was crying about the 12 hours she'd lost. 12 hours when doctors could have helped her, could have helped the baby. 12 hours that might have made all the difference. They wheeled her away for scans. The CT machine was loud. The MRI was louder. Charlotte lay still with her eyes closed and thought about nothing. If she thought about anything, she would break. When they brought her back to the emergency room, there was a police officer waiting. Young guy, maybe 30, serious face. He introduced himself as Officer David Martinez, asked if he could ask Charlotte some questions. Charlotte tried to say yes. Ma'am, I understand you sent a text message last night asking for help. Can you tell me who you sent it to? Charlotte tried. Husband, Brett. And what time was that? Jessica answered. 8:47. There's a timestamp and a read receipt. He read it immediately. Officer Martinez wrote that down. And where was your husband at 8:47 last night, Mrs. Hayes? Charlotte tried to shrug. Didn't know. He texted her this morning saying he stayed at a friend's house after drinks. Jessica said, a guy named Marcus. Do you have this Marcus's contact information? Charlotte shook her head. Officer Martinez looked at Charlotte's phone, took photos of the text thread with his own phone. Documentation, evidence. Mrs. Hayes, I need to ask, do you feel safe at home? Charlotte thought about that. Did she feel safe? She'd been lying on the floor for 11 hours. Her husband had read her emergency text and walked away. Was that safe? She shook her head slowly. Officer Martinez nodded. We're going to need to speak with your husband. Can you tell me where he works? Tech company. Hayes Tech. He's CEO. Officer Martinez raised his eyebrows. Brett Hayes, the CEO, he's your husband? Charlotte nodded. All right, we'll follow up. You focus on getting better, Mrs. Hayes. He left. Charlotte closed her eyes. She was so tired. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with the stroke. Dr. Greenberg returned an hour later with scan results. Jessica was still there, hadn't left Charlotte's side. Charlotte, you had an ischemic stroke. A blood clot blocked blood flow to part of your brain. The damage is moderate but significant. You'll have ongoing challenges with speech and motor control on your right side. With therapy, you should regain some function, but it will take time. Charlotte absorbed this. Permanent damage. Her right hand might never work properly again. Her speech might always be impaired. What about the baby? Jessica asked. Dr. Greenberg's expression was careful. The baby experienced prolonged oxygen deprivation. We're monitoring closely. Heart rate is irregular but stable. The OB/GYN will be in to discuss next steps. She paused. But Charlotte, I need to ask, why didn't you come to the emergency room when symptoms started? Charlotte tried to explain. Couldn't talk. Couldn't call. You texted, though. You were able to text. Yes, texted Brett. Texted 911, and your husband didn't respond to your text? Charlotte shook her head. Dr. Greenberg pulled up a chair, sat down at Charlotte's eye level. Charlotte, I've reviewed your medical history. You've been to this emergency room 3 times in the past 8 months. Each visit was for symptoms that are consistent with stroke warning signs. Severe headaches, dizziness, vision problems, numbness. But each time, you left against medical advice before we could do complete testing. Charlotte remembered those visits, remembered sitting in the waiting area, remembered Brett calling. Baby, you're fine. It's just stress, just pregnancy hormones. Come home. You don't need all these tests. You're overreacting. And she'd listened, had signed the papers, had gone home. Each time. Dr. Greenberg continued. Each time you left, the notes say your husband called and you became distressed and departed. Were you prevented from getting medical care? Charlotte thought about Brett's voice on those phone calls. Calm, reasonable, logical, making her feel silly for being there, making her feel like she was wasting everyone's time. She nodded slowly. Dr. Greenberg's expression hardened. I see. Thank you for being honest. That information is important. This wasn't just a stroke. This was something much worse. And Charlotte was just beginning to understand how bad it really was. A commotion outside the room drew everyone's attention. Raised voices, someone arguing with the nurses. Then Brett burst through the door. He looked perfect. Expensive suit, hair styled like he'd come straight from an important meeting. His face was arranged in concern. Baby, what happened? Why didn't you call me? Charlotte stared at him. At this man she'd married 5 years ago. This man who'd read her text that she was having a stroke and deleted it. This man who'd left her dying on the floor. Jessica stood up, positioned herself between Brett and Charlotte's bed. She did call you, Brett. 8:47 last night. You read the text. Brett's face flickered. Just for a second. Then the concerned husband mask was back. My phone was acting weird yesterday. Lots of texts didn't come through. I didn't see any emergency message. Officer Martinez stepped into the room. Charlotte hadn't realized he was still there. Sir, according to phone records, you received a text at 8:47 p.m. last night. The message was marked as read at 8:47 p.m. I'm telling you, I don't remember seeing any emergency text. If I had, I would have called 911 immediately. Of course I would have. Brett said it so smoothly, so convincingly. Charlotte almost believed him herself, but she knew what she'd seen. The red receipt, 8:47. He saw it. Sir, Officer Martinez said, can you account for your whereabouts last night from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m.? Brett's pause was barely noticeable. Just 1 second. But Charlotte saw it. The calculation. The lie forming. I was at my business partner's house, Marcus Donnelly. We had drinks after work. I crashed there because I didn't want to drive. You can ask him. We'll need his contact information. He's in meetings all day. Major deal closing. I can have him call you tonight. We'll wait, Officer Martinez said. He pulled out his phone. I can look him up. Donnelly, you said? Charlotte watched Brett's jaw clench. Just slightly. She'd been married to him for 5 years. She knew his tells. The slight jaw clench meant he was cornered. Meant he was about to lie bigger. Actually, Brett said, I just remembered. Marcus might not be the best person to ask. We did have drinks, but I didn't stay at his place. I stayed at a hotel. The Hampton Inn off exit 12. I can show you the receipt. Officer Martinez wrote this down. Which room number? I don't remember. I can check my email for the confirmation. Jessica pulled out her phone, started scrolling through something. Her face went pale, then hard. Brett, Jessica said quietly, where were you at 8:55 last night? I told you. Hotel. Really? Because Amber Sinclair posted on Instagram last night. 8:55 p.m. Location tagged at the Pinnacle Room. It's a private event space downtown, and you're in the photo. The room went silent. Brett's face drained of color. That must be an old photo. She must have reposted it. Jessica turned her phone around, showed Officer Martinez, showed Dr. Greenberg, showed Charlotte. The photo was clear. Champagne tower, birthday balloons, people in cocktail attire. And there in the background was Brett, arm around a young blonde woman, both of them laughing. The woman was blowing out candles on a cake. The caption said, "Best birthday ever. Thanks to my amazing boss for making tonight perfect." Tagged with Brett's Instagram handle. The timestamp said 8:55 p.m., 8 minutes after he'd read Charlotte's stroke text. Officer Martinez zoomed in on the photo. Sir, this photo was posted live last night. It has a geotag and timestamp. You're clearly visible. This was 8 minutes after your wife texted you about having a stroke. Brett's mask cracked. Charlotte saw rage flash across his face. Then panic. Then cold calculation. I can explain. Please do, Officer Martinez said. But Charlotte didn't want to hear his explanation. Didn't want to hear whatever lie he constructed. She turned her head away from him, looked at the wall instead. Her right hand lay useless on the hospital bed. Her speech was broken. Her baby's heart was beating irregularly. And her husband had been at a party. He'd chosen a party over her life. Here's something you need to understand. Medical gaslighting is real. If a doctor says we need to run tests and your partner says you're fine, trust the doctor, not your partner. Take photos of your medical records. Email them to yourself. Your partner can't delete what's in your inbox. Charlotte had learned this lesson too late, but maybe someone listening could learn it in time. Brett tried to leave the hospital room. Officer Martinez blocked the doorway. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay and answer questions." "I don't have to answer anything without my lawyer." "That's your right. But your wife is lying in a hospital after suffering a stroke that could have been prevented if she'd received timely care. And evidence shows you were at a party 8 minutes after reading her emergency text. So either you help us understand what happened, or we escalate this investigation." Brett's face went through several expressions. Charlotte watched him cycle through options: anger, denial, charm, finally landing on wounded innocence. "Look, I can see how this looks, but you don't understand. Charlotte has been having issues lately: anxiety, depression, pregnancy hormones. She sends dramatic texts all the time. I thought she was just being emotional again." Charlotte felt Jessica's hand tighten on her left hand, squeezing, supportive, angry. "Sir," Officer Martinez said, "the text said stroke. That's pretty specific. She said she was dying before, multiple times, over a headache, over feeling dizzy. I've rushed home so many times for false alarms. I thought this was another one." Dr. Greenberg spoke up. "Mr. Hayes, your wife had 3 emergency room visits in 8 months with stroke warning signs. Did you know that? She gets anxious, makes everything into a crisis. The medical notes indicate you called her during each visit and convinced her to leave against medical advice before we could complete testing. That would have caught the stroke risk." Brett's jaw clenched again. "I was trying to save her from unnecessary stress, from invasive tests she didn't need. I was protecting her." Charlotte tried to speak. "You weren't protecting me." Everyone looked at her. It was the longest sentence she'd managed since the stroke. "Baby," Brett said. His voice went soft, gentle, the voice he used when he wanted something. "You know I love you. I would never hurt you. This is all a misunderstanding." "Who's Amber?" Charlotte managed to ask. Brett froze. Jessica held up her phone, still showing the Instagram photo. "Amber Sinclair, 28 years old. Your executive assistant, according to her bio. The one whose birthday party you were at last night while your wife was dying. She works for me. It was a company event. At 9 p.m. on a Tuesday? At an event space that costs $500 an hour to rent? That's some company party." Officer Martinez took Jessica's phone, scrolled through Amber's Instagram profile. His eyebrows went up. "Sir, there are a lot of photos here of you and Miss Sinclair. Dinners, company trips. This one is from 3 weeks ago in Santa Barbara. That was a business trip. You told me you went to Santa Barbara for work alone," Charlotte said. The words were slow but clear. "You said no spouses allowed." Brett's face tightened. "It was a business trip. Amber came as my assistant. That's her job." Officer Martinez kept scrolling. "There are over 50 photos of you two together going back 18 months. That's a lot of business dinners. She's my assistant. We work closely." "In her bio, she has a link to her blog," Jessica said. She'd pulled it up on her phone. "The most recent post is from 3 months ago. It's called My Journey to Happiness. She talks about finding love in an unexpected place, about a man who makes her feel special, about planning a future together. She doesn't name names, but the details match you, Brett." The room fell silent. Charlotte stared at Brett, waited for the denial, waited for the explanation. Instead, he said, "I want my lawyer. I'm not saying anything else without counsel present." "That's fine," Officer Martinez said, "but I need you to stay in town. We're opening a formal investigation into delayed emergency response and potential negligent conduct. We'll be in touch." Brett looked at Charlotte for just a moment. His mask slipped completely. She saw cold fury in his eyes. Not regret, not shame. Fury that he'd got caught. Then he walked out. After Brett left, the room felt different. Lighter, like pressure releasing. But Charlotte knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. And the worst revelations were still to come. Detective Sarah Morrison arrived the next morning. She was Officer Martinez's superior. Older, more experienced. Sharp eyes that missed nothing. She introduced herself and asked if Charlotte was well enough to answer questions. Charlotte nodded. Her speech was slightly better after a night's rest. Still slurred, but more understandable. Mrs. Hayes, we received security footage from your neighbor. I need to show you something. It's difficult to watch. Are you ready? Charlotte nodded again. Detective Morrison pulled out a tablet, pulled up a video file. This is from the camera aimed at your driveway. It has a partial view of your front windows. The timestamp starts at 8:40 p.m. last night. She pressed play. The video was in color but grainy. Charlotte could see her house. The nursery window on the second floor was lit up. She could see her own shadow moving inside. Folding laundry. 8:42 p.m. Charlotte's shadow stopped moving, stood still for a long moment, then stumbled toward the door. 8:45 p.m. The bedroom light came on. Charlotte's shadow visible through that window, moving slowly, erratically. 8:47 p.m. Charlotte's shadow collapsed, disappeared from view. The bedroom light stayed on, but no movement. 8:47 p.m. A different light came on downstairs. Brett's home office. His shadow visible through that window, sitting at his desk, phone in hand, looking at it. Charlotte watched Brett's shadow on the screen, watched him look at his phone, watched him stand up, watched him walk toward the doorway of his office, heading toward the stairs. Then stop, look at his phone again, turn around, go back to his desk. 8:51 p.m. Brett's office light went off. The garage door opened, a car backed out. Brett's Mercedes drove away. The bedroom light stayed on. Charlotte's shadow did not reappear. 9:03 p.m. The bedroom light turned off automatically. On a timer Charlotte had set, so she wouldn't have to get up to turn off lights when she was heavily pregnant. The room stayed dark. No movement. No shadows. Just an empty house with a woman dying on the floor. 7 a.m. Brett's Mercedes returned, pulled into the garage. Garage door closed. 7:23 a.m. Charlotte's shadow appeared in the nursery window, dragging herself across the floor toward her phone. Detective Morrison paused the video. Mrs. Hayes, I need to ask, did your husband come upstairs at any point last night? Did he check on you? Charlotte shook her head. Never came up. Left me. The video shows him in his office at 8:47 when you texted him. He looked at his phone. He saw the message. He started toward the stairs, then stopped and went back to his desk. 4 minutes later, he left the house. Is that accurate? Yes. Where did he go? Party, Mistress, birthday? Detective Morrison nodded. We're looking into that. There's more I need to show you. This is harder. She pulled up another file. We executed a search warrant on your home this morning. With your permission, we accessed your home security system. Did you know you had cameras inside your house? Charlotte shook her head. Brett had installed them, said it was for security while he traveled. She thought they were only outside. There's a camera in your bedroom. Disguised as a smoke detector, it captured everything. She pressed play on a new video. This one was from inside Charlotte's bedroom. Clear view of the doorway and part of the hall. The timestamp started at 8:45 p.m. Charlotte watched herself stumble into the bedroom, watched herself try to get her phone, watched herself collapse near the door. 8:47 p.m. The sound of footsteps on the stairs. Brett's footsteps. Charlotte knew that sound, had heard it 1,000 times. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs, just out of camera view. Silence. Then Brett's voice. Quiet. Like he was talking to himself. Oh, shit. More silence. Then his footsteps going back downstairs. Fast, not helping. Running away. The camera had audio. It picked up everything. Charlotte's labored breathing. The sound of Brett's car starting in the garage. Then nothing. Hours of nothing. Just Charlotte's breathing, getting shallower. Detective Morrison stopped the video. Mrs. Hayes, this footage shows that your husband was aware you had collapsed. He saw you. He chose to leave. This is no longer about a missed text message. This is about knowingly failing to render aid. This is criminal. Charlotte could not speak, could not process. Brett had been right there, right outside the bedroom, had seen her on the floor, had said, oh shit, and walked away. There's one more thing, Detective Morrison said. We have evidence that someone accessed your phone remotely at 8:53. Someone deleted your text message to the emergency services number. Deleted it from their system before it could be dispatched. We're tracing the IP address, but we believe it came from your husband's phone. Charlotte's world tilted. He didn't just ignore her message. He actively deleted it, made sure no one could help her. Why? Charlotte whispered. Why would he do that? Detective Morrison looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Hayes, were you aware that your life insurance policy was increased 3 months ago? What? Your life insurance? It was $500,000 3 months ago. It was increased to $3.5 million. You're listed as the insured. Your husband is the sole beneficiary. The room spun. Charlotte gripped the bed rail with her left hand. I never signed that. We obtained the insurance application. There's a signature. Can you look at it and tell me if it's yours? Detective Morrison showed her a document on the tablet. The application for increased life insurance. $3.5 million term, life. Beneficiary, Brett Hayes. At the bottom was a signature. Charlotte Morrison Hayes. Charlotte stared at it. The signature was close. Very close. But wrong. The loop on the C was too big. The tail on the W too short. Not mine. Fake. You're saying this signature was forged? Yes. I never saw this before. Detective Morrison and Officer Martinez exchanged looks. Mrs. Hayes, Detective Morrison said, combined with the security footage and the deleted text message, we have grounds to file charges. Attempted manslaughter, reckless endangerment, insurance fraud, falsifying documents. This is serious. Charlotte nodded. Good. Let it be serious. Let Brett face consequences. Jessica spoke up. What about my daughter's safety? That man tried to kill her. What's stopping him from trying again? We're issuing a restraining order. Mr. Hayes cannot come within 500 feet of Charlotte or contact her in any way. We're also freezing their joint accounts pending investigation. He'll just use his own money, Jessica said. We're aware, but it limits his access to marital assets. For now. Charlotte felt something shift. This was real. This was happening. Brett was going to be held accountable. But even as relief washed over her, a new fear crept in. If Brett had forged the insurance documents, if he'd planned this, how long had he been planning it? And was Charlotte really the first? 2 days after Detective Morrison showed Charlotte the security footage, Brett's business partner arrived at the hospital. Marcus Donnelly looked uncomfortable. Guilty. Charlotte, I need to talk to you. Jessica stood up, positioned herself between Marcus and Charlotte's bed. You can leave, please. I need to say this. I need her to hear it. Charlotte nodded. Let him speak. Marcus sat in the visitor chair, couldn't meet Charlotte's eyes. I knew about Amber, about the affair. I've known for months, maybe longer. Brett swore it meant nothing, swore he'd end it. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. He looked up finally. But I should have told you, should have warned you. I was a coward. I chose my business partnership over doing the right thing. I chose protecting Brett over protecting you. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Charlotte studied him. Marcus had been Brett's friend before he was hers. They'd been college roommates, had started the company together. She'd always known where Marcus's loyalty lay, but he was here now, confessing. That meant something. Why now? Charlotte asked. Why tell me this now? Because I saw the news about the stroke, about the text message, about Brett being at Amber's party, and I realized I've been protecting a monster. He leaned forward. Brett called me this morning, asked me to lie for him, to say he was at my place all night, to give him an alibi. What did you say? I said no. I said I'm done lying for him. I said he needs to face what he did. He called me a traitor. Said I'm destroying the company. Said he'll sue me. Marcus pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. Charlotte, I'm going to help you however I can. I'll testify. I'll provide financial records. I'll do whatever it takes because you deserve better. You deserve someone to speak up. And I didn't, but I am now. He handed her the envelope. There's something else you should know. Brett took out a loan against the company 3 months ago. $2 million. I thought it was for expansion. But now I'm wondering if it was to pay the life insurance premiums. He needed you dead to pay back the loan. Charlotte's breath caught. It was worse than she thought. Brett didn't just want her dead for the insurance money. He needed her dead. Anais. He was in financial trouble. Thank you for telling me, Charlotte said. After Marcus left, Charlotte lay back against the pillows. Every new piece of information made it worse, made it clearer. Brett had planned this, had created conditions where she would have a stroke, had prevented treatment, had increased the insurance, had waited for her to die. When the stroke finally happened, he saw his opportunity. Let her lie there for hours, deleted the emergency text, went to a party with his mistress while Charlotte died alone. Except she didn't die. She survived. And now he was trapped, caught, exposed. That afternoon, Charlotte had more visitors she didn't expect. A woman arrived, 45 years old, sharp eyes, expensive suit. Mrs. Hayes, I'm Rebecca Thornton. I'm a family law attorney. Your friend Jessica called me, asked me to come. I've reviewed the basics of your case. I'd like to represent you. Pro bono if necessary. What your husband did is unconscionable, and I want to help. Why pro bono? Charlotte asked. Can't afford big lawyer. Because what happened to you could happen to any woman. Because men like your husband need to face consequences. Because I have resources, and I want to use them for good. She sat down, pulled out her own tablet. So what do you say? Will you let me help? Charlotte looked at Jessica, at Detective Morrison, who had stayed to hear Marcus's testimony, at all these people who had shown up for her, who believed her, who wanted to protect her. Yes, please help, Rebecca smiled. Good. Now let's talk strategy. First, we're filing for emergency custody once the baby is born, then divorce based on fault, adultery, fraud, cruel treatment. We're going for full custody, maximum child support, and division of assets that reflects his conduct. He has good lawyers, Charlotte said, has money. So do I, and I'm better. Trust me. For the first time since the stroke, Charlotte felt something that wasn't fear or grief. She felt anger, clean and sharp and righteous. Brett tried to kill her, tried to cash in on her death, tried to erase her so he could play house with his mistress. He failed. She survived. And now she was going to make sure he regretted it. But that night, alone in her hospital room, Charlotte got an email that changed everything. The subject line said, "You need to know the truth." The sender was someone named Rachel Martinez. Charlotte almost deleted it, but curiosity won. She opened it. Mrs. Hayes, you don't know me, but I know your husband. My sister was married to him 7 years ago. Her name was Elena Martinez. She died while she was pregnant. They said it was natural causes, a stroke. But after seeing the news about what happened to you, I did some research. Elena had the same symptoms you did before she died. Headaches, dizziness, numbness, and Brett convinced her not to see doctors, just like he did to you. The police never investigated because there was no evidence of foul play. But now I'm wondering, was my sister the first, or were you? I've attached Elena's death certificate and medical records I found in her belongings. I think you should see them. I think the police should see them. Whatever Brett did to you, I think he did it to Elena first. I'm so sorry I didn't see it then. I'm so sorry I couldn't save her. But maybe together we can make sure he never does this again. Please contact me. Rachel Martinez. Charlotte stared at the email. Read it again. Then again. Elena Martinez, Brett's wife before Charlotte. Dead from a stroke while pregnant. 7 years ago. The same thing Brett tried to do to Charlotte. Her hands shaking, Charlotte opened the attachments. Elena's death certificate. Cause of death. Ischemic stroke. 6 months pregnant. Medical records showing 3 emergency room visits in the months before Elena's death. Each one for stroke warning signs. Each one left AMA, just like Charlotte. It wasn't just attempted murder. Brett had done this before. He'd done this before and gotten away with it. Charlotte forwarded the email to Detective Morrison with shaking hands. Then she lay back in the hospital bed and stared at the ceiling. How many women had Brett killed or tried to kill, and how had he gotten away with it for so long? The next morning, Detective Morrison arrived early. She had Rachel Martinez with her, and another woman Charlotte didn't recognize. Mrs. Hayes, this is Rachel Martinez, Elena's sister, and this is Detective Patricia Coleman from the cold case unit. Detective Coleman sat down, looked Charlotte in the eye. Mrs. Hayes, we've reopened Elena Martinez's case. Based on the similarities between her death and your attack, we believe your husband may have murdered his previous wife. But there's more. She pulled out a file. We found records of another marriage. 10 years ago, Brett's first wife. Her name was Sophia Reynolds. She died of what was ruled an accidental fall. She was 8 months pregnant. The life insurance payout was $1.5 million. Charlotte felt the room spin. 3 wives, 3 pregnancies, 2 deaths, 1 attempted murder. Brett was a serial killer who targeted pregnant women for insurance money. And Charlotte was the only one who'd survived. The day after Charlotte learned about Elena and Sophia, Brett was arrested. Charlotte watched the news coverage from her hospital bed. Brett in handcuffs being walked out of Hayes Tech headquarters. Cameras everywhere. Charges, attempted manslaughter, reckless endangerment, insurance fraud, falsifying documents, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Bail set at $1 million. Brett posted it immediately, but the company board placed him on leave. Investors pulled funding. Stock dropped 42% in one day. Marcus assumed interim CEO role, promised to investigate company finances, cooperate with authorities. Brett's empire was crumbling. Not because Charlotte destroyed it, because he destroyed it himself by getting caught. Charlotte felt satisfaction, cold and sharp and earned. But that satisfaction lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, Brett's mother arrived. Patricia Hayes was 65 years old, wealthy socialite, old money from Boston. She'd never liked Charlotte, thought her son had married beneath him. She didn't come to Charlotte's hospital room. She went straight to family court, filed for emergency custody of baby Grace. Rebecca Thornton burst into Charlotte's room, waving legal papers. That bitch filed for custody, claims you're mentally unstable. Unfit mother, wants Grace placed with her and Brett's father pending the criminal trial. Charlotte's heart stopped. No, she can't. Grace is mine. She's bringing expert witnesses. Psychiatrists who'll say you have Munchausen syndrome, that you fabricate medical crises for attention. She's arguing that Grace should be with a stable family, not a disabled single mother. Rebecca's face was furious. This is a coordinated attack. Patricia is funding Brett's defense. She's trying to destroy your credibility before the criminal trial starts. If she can prove you're unstable, it undermines your testimony against Brett. When is hearing? Charlotte asked. 72 hours. Charlotte's stomach dropped. 72 hours to prove she could parent. 72 hours while still recovering from a stroke, while Grace was still in the NICU, while she could barely speak clearly or use her right hand. I can't do this, Charlotte said. Can't win this. Yes, you can, Rebecca said. You're going to work harder than you've ever worked. You're going to push through pain. You're going to do it for Grace. Can you do that? Charlotte thought about Grace in the NICU, about her tiny hand gripping Charlotte's finger, about the life she wanted to give her daughter. Yes, I can do that. The next 72 hours were brutal. Speech therapist came 8 hours a day. Intensive work, tongue exercise, breath control, muscle memory. Say it again. I deserve better. I deserve better. Again, slower. Focus on the S sound. I deserve better. Again, I deserve better. Over and over, hundreds of times until Charlotte's mouth hurt, until she wanted to scream. But she kept going because in 72 hours, she had to stand in front of a judge and convince him she could parent her daughter. Physical therapy for her right hand, grip exercises, fine motor skills. Occupational therapy taught one-handed everything. One-handed bottle feeding. Charlotte practiced with a doll, awkward at first. The bottle kept slipping, but she learned, cradled the doll in her right arm even though that arm was weak. Used her left hand to hold the bottle. One-handed diaper changing. Laid the doll on the changing table. Used her left hand to lift legs, slide diaper under. Fasten tabs. Her right hand stayed pressed on the baby's chest, keeping her safe, keeping her still. It was possible. Harder, slower, but possible. Charlotte practiced her testimony. Rebecca asked questions. Charlotte answered, again and again. Mrs. Hayes, can you care for your daughter? Yes, I can hold her, feed her, change her, love her. That's all she needs. What about your physical limitations? I have use of my left hand. My right hand is weak but healing. One hand is enough. Love doesn't need 2 hands. That phrase stuck with Charlotte. Love doesn't need 2 hands. By the 3rd day, Charlotte could speak mostly clearly, still slower than before, still some slurring under stress, but understandable. Her right hand could grip weakly, could support, could help, not normal, but functional. It would have to be enough. The custody hearing was at the county courthouse. Rebecca dressed Charlotte carefully. Conservative dress, light makeup to hide the exhaustion, hair pulled back neatly. "You look strong," Rebecca said. "You are strong. Remember that." Jessica came for support. Marcus came, ready to testify about Brett's character. Detective Morrison came with evidence files, and Patricia Hayes was there, with 3 expensive lawyers, conservative suit, perfect hair, confident expression. She looked at Charlotte across the courtroom. Her eyes were cold, calculating. This woman had raised Brett, had taught him to see people as tools, as obstacles, as means to an end, and now she wanted Charlotte's baby. The judge entered, everyone stood. Honorable Judge Williams, woman in her 60s, no-nonsense expression. Patricia's attorney spoke first, painted Charlotte as impaired, showed medical records of the stroke, emphasized the speech problems, the motor control issues, suggested Charlotte needed psychiatric evaluation. "Your Honor, my client is concerned for his granddaughter's safety. Mrs. Hayes' stroke has left her with significant disabilities. She cannot properly grip objects. She has speech impediment. She's living with her mother because she cannot care for herself. How can she care for an infant?" Rebecca stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence." She showed the security footage. Brett in his office reading Charlotte's text, walking toward the stairs, stopping, leaving. She showed the bedroom camera footage, Brett's voice saying, "Oh shit," and walking away. She showed the insurance application. The forged signature, the timeline increased 3 months before the stroke. "Your Honor, Mr. Hayes didn't just fail to help his wife. He actively prevented help from arriving. He deleted her emergency text. He left her to die. And evidence suggests he financially benefited from her death. This is not a concerned father. This is a man who attempted to murder his wife and unborn child." Patricia's lawyers objected loudly. Judge Williams held up her hand, quiet. "Miss Thornton, do you have proof of these allegations?" "Yes, Your Honor. The police investigation is ongoing. Charges are pending, but the evidence is clear. Mr. Hayes knowingly failed to render aid. He deleted emergency communications. He forged documents, and he had motive." Judge Williams looked at Patricia Hayes. "Mrs. Hayes, your son is accused of attempting to murder his wife. Why should I place the child with your family?" "Because Charlotte is unstable," Patricia said. Her voice was calm, practiced. "She's been mentally ill for years. Brett tried to help her, tried to get her treatment, but she refused. She's paranoid, delusional. She's making these accusations because she's angry about the divorce." Rebecca stood. "That's interesting, Mrs. Hayes, because we have evidence that you knew about Elena Martinez, Brett's second wife, who died 7 years ago of a stroke while pregnant, just like Brett tried to kill Charlotte." The courtroom went silent. Patricia's face didn't change, but her lawyers started whispering urgently. "Did you help your son cover up Elena's murder?" Rebecca asked. "Objection," Patricia's lawyer said. "Sustained," Judge Williams said, but her eyes were sharp, interested. "Mrs. Hayes, were you aware of the circumstances of Elena Martinez's death?" "I knew she died," Patricia said carefully. "It was tragic, natural causes that look exactly like what happened to Charlotte. That's quite a coincidence. It's not a crime to be unlucky twice. It's a crime to help commit murder," Rebecca said. "That's enough," Judge Williams said. "I've heard enough." She looked at Charlotte. "Mrs. Hayes, can you stand and approach the bench?" Charlotte stood, walked forward. Her right leg was still weak but functional. She didn't stumble. "Mrs. Hayes, tell me in your own words, can you care for your daughter?" Charlotte spoke clearly, slowly, but clearly. "Yes, Your Honor. I can hold her with one arm. I can feed her with one hand. I can change her, bathe her, love her. That's all Grace needs. One hand is enough when you love someone." "And what about your speech impediment?" "It's better. Getting better every day. Grace doesn't care if I talk slowly. She just needs to hear my voice, needs to know I'm there." "What about living arrangements?" "I'm living with my mother temporarily. I have support, my brother, my friends. I have a village." Judge Williams studied Charlotte. then looked at Patricia. Then she looked at the security footage still displayed on the courtroom screen. Brett walking away from his dying wife. I've made my decision. This is one of the most disturbing custody cases I've seen. Mr. Hayes' conduct is beyond unconscionable. He left his wife and unborn child to die. He deleted emergency communications. He forged insurance documents. Even if we set aside the criminal allegations, his moral fitness to parent is in serious question. Custody is granted to mother. Full legal and physical custody. Mr. Hayes is granted supervised visitation only. 2 hours per week in a supervised facility. You'll pay maximum child support under state guidelines. She looked at Patricia. Mrs. Hayes, your petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, if evidence emerges that you had knowledge of or participated in criminal conduct related to Elena Martinez or Sophia Reynolds, I will refer this matter for prosecution. The gavel came down. Charlotte sat there, unable to move. She won. Grace was hers. Patricia couldn't take her. But as Charlotte looked at Patricia's face across the courtroom, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Patricia was smiling. Not a big smile, just a small curve at the corner of her mouth. Like she knew something Charlotte didn't. Like this wasn't over. Like she had another move planned. And 3 days later, Charlotte found out what that move was. Charlotte was supposed to be released from the hospital the day after the custody hearing. Grace was still in the NICU, but stable, gaining weight, off oxygen. The doctor said another week maybe, then she could come home. Charlotte was planning where they would live, how she would manage, one-handed parenting, speech therapy, physical therapy, starting over. But that morning, Charlotte woke up with numbness in her left hand. No, 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 not again. She tried to call for a nurse. Her speech was slurred again. Worse than before. Panic button. She hit it with her left hand. Except her left hand didn't work right anymore. Der Greenberg rushed in, took one look at Charlotte, and called for a crash cart. Get me a CT stat. She's having another stroke. They rushed Charlotte back to imaging, back to the machines, back to the fear. But this stroke was smaller. Dr. Greenberg said it was a TIA, transient ischemic attack. Mini stroke, still serious, still dangerous, but not as bad as the first one. Mrs. Hayes, Dr. Greenberg said, this shouldn't have happened. You're on blood thinners, anticoagulants. You shouldn't be having more clots. She paused, looked at Charlotte's chart on the computer. When was your last dose of medication? Last night. Nurse gave it. Let me see something. Dr. Greenberg left, came back with Charlotte's medication bottles from the nurse's station. She opened one, poured pills into her hand, stared at them. Then she took one pill and broke it in half. Inside was white powder. These aren't blood thinners, Dr. Greenberg said. Her voice was cold, furious. These are sugar pills. Someone's been giving you placebos. Charlotte's world tilted. Someone was sabotaging her medication. Someone was trying to give her another stroke. Someone wanted her dead. Dr. Greenberg called hospital security immediately, called Detective Morrison, and demanded an investigation. Who had access to Charlotte's medication? Nurses, doctors, visitors. They reviewed security footage from the nurse's station, reviewed visitor logs, and there it was. Patricia Hayes had visited the hospital 3 days ago. Right after the custody hearing, she'd stopped at the nurse's station, asked about Charlotte's condition, chatted with the nurse on duty. The footage showed Patricia's hand near Charlotte's medication tray. Just for a second, just long enough to switch the bottles. They found the nurse, a young woman named Sarah, 24 years old, new graduate. Detective Morrison questioned her. Did Patricia Hayes give you anything? Money? Gifts? Sarah broke down crying and she offered me $50,000. Said her daughter-in-law was faking illness for attention. Said the pills were vitamins that would actually help Charlotte. Said she was doing a good thing. She gave me half up front, $25,000. Said I'd get the rest when Charlotte was released from the hospital. I didn't know, I swear I didn't know it would hurt her. I thought I was helping. Sarah was arrested, charged with conspiracy to commit assault, reckless endangerment, and Patricia Hayes was arrested too. But Patricia had good lawyers, the best money could buy. She claimed Sarah was lying. That the money was a loan, not a bribe. That she never touched Charlotte's medication. That this was all a misunderstanding. She posted bail, walked free, and Charlotte was back in the hospital. Weakened, vulnerable. The custody hearing was supposed to be in 48 hours, but Charlotte could barely speak again, could barely move her left hand. How was she going to convince a judge she could care for Grace when she could barely care for herself? Rebecca came to the hospital, sat beside Charlotte's bed. "We need to postpone the hearing." "No," Charlotte said. Her speech was bad again. Words garbled. "Can't wait. Patricia will use this. Will say I'm too sick. You are too sick. Too sick, Charlie. You need to recover. If I wait, I lose. She'll convince Judge I'm unstable, that I can't care for Grace, have to go to hearing. You can barely talk, then I'll write, I'll type, I'll do whatever it takes. But I'm not giving up." Rebecca looked at her, then nodded. "Okay, then we fight." But that night, alone in her hospital room, Charlotte hit her lowest point. She couldn't speak, couldn't use either hand well. Her baby was in a plastic box 2 floors up. The man who tried to kill her was out on bail. His mother had just tried to kill her again. And Charlotte had to convince a judge she was capable of parenting. It felt impossible. Jessica came by after her shift, found Charlotte crying, silent tears because Charlotte couldn't make sounds anymore. "Hey," Jessica said softly, "talk to me." Charlotte shook her head, couldn't talk. "Then listen," Jessica pulled up a chair. "Charlie, I've been a nurse for 10 years. I've seen a lot of patients. A lot of people facing impossible situations. And you know what the ones who survive have in common? They're stubborn. They refuse to give up even when giving up makes sense. You're stubborn, Charlie. You survived 11 hours on that floor. You survived Brett. You survived Patricia's first murder attempt. You'll survive this." Charlotte wanted to believe her. "And Grace needs you," Jessica continued. "Not a perfect mother, not a mother with 2 working hands and perfect speech, just you. Her mother, who loves her, who fights for her. That's all babies need. To be loved, to be safe. You can give her that. Even one-handed, even with slurred speech. You can give her that." Charlotte let those words sink in. Maybe Jessica was right. Maybe Charlotte didn't have to be perfect. Maybe she just had to be there, to show up, to fight one more fight. She could do one more fight. But the next morning brought news that made fighting feel impossible. Marcus Donnelly was dead. They found Marcus in his apartment. Apparent suicide. He'd hanged himself. There was a note, typed, printed, no signature. "I can't live with what I've done. I helped Brett defraud investors. I forged Charlotte's insurance signature. I'm responsible for everything. I'm sorry." Marcus, Detective Morrison came to Charlotte's hospital room, showed her the note. Charlotte read it, then read it again. "Not his," she managed to say, words slow but clear. "Marcus didn't write this. How do you know?" Charlotte pointed to specific phrases. "Marcus doesn't talk like this, doesn't write like this. This is wrong." Detective Morrison nodded slowly. "We thought so too. We brought in a handwriting expert. The note was typed, but Marcus's sister provided other writing samples. The expert says the phrasing patterns don't match. The vocabulary is wrong. This note was written by someone else." She paused. "Charlotte, Marcus was murdered, made to look like suicide. And we think we know who did it." "Who?" "The same person who forged your insurance signature. Patricia Hayes hired someone, a professional, someone who specializes in making murders look like accidents or suicides." Charlotte felt cold all over. "How many?" she asked. "How many people has she killed? We're investigating. But Charlotte, there's something you need to see." Detective Morrison pulled up files on her tablet. "Your brother Daniel, he's a computer forensics expert, right?" Charlotte nodded. "He contacted us yesterday, said he'd been looking into Brett's past, into the deaths of Elena and Sophia, and he found something." She showed Charlotte a document. "This is the original police report from Elena Martinez's death. 7 years ago, the file was supposed to be lost. But Daniel hacked into an old police server, found archived records. Elena had 3 emergency room visits before her death. Same symptoms as you. And each time, Brett convinced her to leave before testing was complete, just like Charlotte. Elena texted her sister the day before she died, Said she didn't feel safe. Said something was wrong, but she thought she was being paranoid. Thought Brett was right that she was just anxious. She died the next day. Stroke. 6 months pregnant. Life insurance paid out $2 million. Charlotte absorbed this, then asked the question she was afraid to ask. And Sophia? Detective Morrison pulled up another file. Sophia Reynolds, Brett's first wife. 10 years ago, she died of an accidental fall, 8 months pregnant. But Daniel found something interesting. Sophia had changed her life insurance beneficiary 2 weeks before she died. Changed it from Brett to her sister. $1.5 million. Brett was furious. Their friend said he and Sophia had a huge fight about it. She said she didn't trust him anymore, said he was acting strange. 2 weeks later, she fell down the basement stairs. Died instantly. Baby died too. The police ruled it an accident, but the sister always suspected foul play. She tried to get the case reopened, but there wasn't enough evidence. Charlotte felt sick. He's killed before, multiple times, and gotten away with it. Yes, and his mother helped him. We found financial records. Patricia paid for Brett's lawyer after Sophia's death. She helped him handle the insurance claims. She knew. How many? Charlotte asked again. How many wives? We're still investigating. But Charlotte, we think there might be more. We're looking into any women Brett dated seriously, any women who died suddenly, any women with suspicious accidents. This isn't just attempted murder. This is serial killing. And Charlotte was the only one who'd survived. That afternoon, Charlotte's brother Daniel arrived with the laptop. Charlie, I need to show you something. He pulled up files, documents, photos. I've been digging for the past week, looking into every woman Brett ever dated, every woman he married, every woman who got close to him. And I found a pattern. He showed Charlotte a timeline, 12 years ago. Brett dated a woman named Jennifer Walsh. They were engaged. She was 4 months pregnant. She died in a car accident, single car collision. Ruled accidental. Life insurance payout, $500,000. 10 years ago, Sophia Reynolds, married, 8 months pregnant, fell downstairs, died. $1.5 million. 7 years ago, Elena Martinez, married, 6 months pregnant, stroke, died, $2 million. And now you, married, 7 months pregnant, stroke, attempted murder. $3.5 million. Daniel looked at Charlotte. He has a type. Pregnant women, women who trust him, women who sign insurance policies, and he kills them right before the baby is born. Because life insurance pays out more if there's a tragic death during pregnancy. Sympathy factor. Less scrutiny. Charlotte stared at the timeline. 4 women, 3 dead, 1 survived. And Patricia Hayes had helped him every time. Hired lawyers, paid cleanup costs, made evidence disappear. This was a family business. Mother and son, killing pregnant women for insurance money. That night, Detective Morrison came back with a plan. Charlotte, we need to set a trap. What kind of trap? We need to make Brett and Patricia think they've won, that you're not going to survive, that they're going to get away with it. Charlotte listened as Detective Morrison explained. They would leak information to the media. Charlotte Hayes in coma, not expected to survive. Baby Gray stable, but Charlotte's condition deteriorating. Brett and Patricia would think Charlotte was dying, would think they'd succeeded, would let their guard down, and Charlotte's hospital room would be bugged. When Brett and Patricia visited, thinking Charlotte couldn't hear, they'd talk. They'd reveal things. They'd confess. And every word would be recorded. It's risky, Detective Morrison said. They might not come. They might not say anything incriminating, but it's our best shot at getting a full confession, at tying Patricia to all the murders, at making sure they never do this again. Charlotte thought about Jennifer, about Sophia, about Elena, about all the women who didn't survive. Do it, Charlotte said. Set the trap. I want them to confess everything. 2 days later, the news broke. Charlotte Hayes in critical condition, doctors not optimistic, family preparing for the worst. Charlotte was actually fine, recovering from the mini stroke, getting stroke care. But the hospital staff were in on the plan. When Brett and Patricia called to check on Charlotte's condition, they were told she was comatose. And that night they came. Charlotte was in her hospital bed, eyes closed, breathing tube in place for show, heart monitor beeping slowly. But she was awake, alert, listening. She heard the door open, two sets of footsteps. Brett's voice. It's just us. The nurses are doing rounds. Patricia's voice. How long does she have? Doctors say maybe 48 hours. The second stroke was worse than they thought. Good. Finally, Charlotte focused on staying still, on keeping her breathing even, on not reacting. This should have been over weeks ago, Patricia said. That woman has 9 lives. She should have died on the nursery floor. But no, she had to survive, had to ruin everything. It's fine, Mom. We'll fix this. Charlotte dies. We get custody of Grace. The insurance pays out. We split it like we planned, like we did with Elena, Patricia said. Charlotte's heart was pounding, but she kept still. And Sophia, Brett added, though that was messier. The fall should have looked more accidental. You were young, Patricia said. You've learned since then. Brett laughed. Yeah, strokes are cleaner. Natural causes. No questions. I still can't believe she survived 11 hours without help. Should have finished her off when I saw her on the floor. But there were cameras. Had to be careful. You did the right thing, Patricia said. Leaving looked less suspicious than doing anything. And the deleted text? Genius. Without that text, there was no evidence I knew she needed help. What about Marcus? Brett's voice went cold. Marcus was weak. Was going to testify. Had to go. The suicide note? Patricia sounded pleased. My contact did excellent work. Very believable. Charlotte's chest was tight. They were confessing. To everything. To all of it. When Charlotte's gone, Brett said, we need to be careful with Grace. We'll raise her properly, Patricia said. Teach her the family business. Brett laughed darkly. Maybe she'll be useful when she's older. Insurance policies work on children too. Charlotte wanted to scream, wanted to attack them, but she stayed still. Let them keep talking. This is the last one though, Patricia said. 4 is enough. 5 would draw attention. Agreed. After Charlotte, I'm done. I'll marry someone wealthy next time. Someone who doesn't need life insurance. Someone who... The door burst open. Detective Morrison and 4 officers rushed in. Brett Hayes, Patricia Hayes, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and insurance fraud. Brett and Patricia's faces went white. Charlotte opened her eyes, sat up, pulled out the fake breathing tube. Surprise, she said. The look on Brett's face was worth everything. The trial was fast. With the recorded confession, there wasn't much Brett and Patricia could argue. They tried. Claimed the recording was entrapment. Claimed they were joking. Claimed they didn't mean what they said. But combined with the security footage, the forged insurance documents, the pattern of dead wives, the forensic evidence from Marcus's murder, and testimony from Amber about Brett's financial troubles, the jury didn't believe them. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The verdict came in 4 hours. Brett Hayes, guilty on all counts. First degree attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, 3 counts of first-degree murder for Jennifer, Sophia, and Elena. Murder of Marcus Donnelly. Insurance fraud. Falsifying documents. Sentence. Life without possibility of parole. Patricia Hayes, guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to murder, attempted murder, medical sabotage. Sentence. 40 years. Charlotte sat in the courtroom holding 8-month-old Grace. Watched them led away in handcuffs. Brett looked at her one last time, his eyes full of hate. Charlotte looked back, felt nothing, no fear, no anger, just relief that it was over. After the sentencing, Charlotte gave a statement on the courthouse steps. She spoke slowly. Her speech was better now, 90% clear, but she still slurred slightly when tired. Justice was served today, not just for me, but for every woman who's been dismissed, every woman who's been gaslit, every woman who's been told she's being dramatic when she knows something is wrong. She paused, held Grace closer. Trust yourselves. Trust your bodies. If someone is preventing you from getting medical care, that's abuse. If someone is making you doubt your own health, that's abuse. You deserve better. You deserve safety. You deserve partners who protect you, not endanger you. And remember, never sign financial documents after drinking anything your partner gave you. Document everything. Take photos of your medical records. Email them to yourself. Your partner can't delete what's in your inbox. Charlotte smiled slightly. I thought losing Brett would destroy me. Instead, losing him gave me back myself. She walked away, Grace in her arms, her family flanking her, media shouting questions she didn't answer. She'd said what she needed to say. The rest was just noise. 2 years later, Charlotte stood in her small house, the one she'd bought with the settlement money from Brett's estate. 2 bedrooms, tiny yard, nothing fancy, but hers. Grace was 2 years old now, running everywhere, climbing everything, talking in full sentences. Mama, up? More juice. Read book. Charlotte scooped Grace up with her left arm. Her right arm was stronger now, could grip reasonably well, could help. But the left arm did most of the work. One hand was enough. Charlotte's speech was 98% clear now, only slurred when she was exhausted or stressed. Most people didn't notice anymore. She'd started a nonprofit, Stroke Awareness for Pregnant Women, taught medical professionals about medical gaslighting, created screening protocols, trained ER staff to recognize intimate partner violence. In 2 years, they documented 14 prevented strokes in pregnant women. 14 women who'd been encouraged to stay for testing instead of being sent home. 14 women and babies safe because Charlotte spoke up. Charlotte worked from her home office while Grace napped. Freelance architecture and nonprofit management. Made enough to support them. Not rich, but stable. She had a village. Her mother visited daily. Her brother came over constantly. Jessica was there every weekend. Charlotte had healed. Not completely. The stroke left permanent damage. She'd never be normal again. But she was whole. Different than before, but whole. That afternoon, Charlotte took Grace to the cemetery. 3 graves in a row. Jennifer Walsh, Sophia Reynolds, Elena Martinez, and a 4th headstone. For the women we couldn't save. Charlotte placed flowers at each grave, held Grace's hand. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, Charlotte whispered to Elena, but I made sure he can't do this again. Grace tugged Charlotte's hand. Mama, go play? Yeah, baby, let's go play. As they walked away, Charlotte felt peace. Real, complete peace. She'd survived. Not because she was special, because she was stubborn. Because she had people who believed her when she said something was wrong. Charlotte strapped Grace into her car seat, got in the driver's seat, started the engine. Her phone buzzed. Another text for her reasons I fought folder. She had 53 now, 53 women who trusted themselves because Charlotte spoke up. This one said, 5 years ago, I saw you on the news. It made me leave my abusive marriage. Today, I'm remarried to someone who actually loves me. Thank you for showing me that surviving is possible. Charlotte saved the text, started to drive home. She thought about the woman she was 3 years ago, married to Brett, pregnant, painting the nursery alone, ignoring warning signs, making herself small. That woman was gone. The woman who remained was different, scarred, one-handed, slower speaking, but stronger, wiser, free. Charlotte Morrison, not Hayes anymore. She'd taken back her maiden name, taken back herself. Survivor, mother, advocate, fighter. She was enough, more than enough. She was everything. That night, Charlotte put Grace to bed, read 3 stories, sang a lullaby, kissed her forehead. Mama, Grace said sleepily. Yes, baby, you're the best mama ever. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. You're the best Grace ever. Grace giggled, closed her eyes, fell asleep holding Charlotte's hand. Charlotte sat there in the dark room, watching her daughter sleep, listening to her breathe. 3 years ago, Charlotte thought she would never hear these sounds, never know this joy, never hold her baby. But she fought. She survived. She made it through impossible odds. And now she had this perfect, peaceful moment, this beautiful daughter, this hard-won life. Charlotte whispered to the darkness, I thought losing him would destroy me. Instead, losing him gave me back myself. That was the truth, the real truth. Not revenge, not justice, not vindication. Just the simple truth that she was better without him. Safer, stronger, more herself. She'd survived. That was everything. Charlotte kissed Grace's forehead one more time, stood up carefully, walked to the door. At the doorway, she looked back. Grace sleeping peacefully, safe, loved, protected. This was worth it, all of it, every moment of pain, every hour of recovery, every difficult step, because it led here to this moment, to this life, to this love. Charlotte turned off the light, closed the door softly, walked to her own room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more work, more healing, more growth. But tonight she would sleep, peaceful, safe, free. The numbness was gone. She was alive, truly alive, finally alive. And that was everything.